Ever wonder if there's like actual evidence for believing in Christianity? Not just, faith and tradition, but something more. Well, get this. We're diving deep into a book that claims exactly that.
The book is called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist.
Catchy, right?
Yes, and it's written by these two heavy hitters in the world of apologetics, Norman Geisler and Frank Turek.
These guys, they don't mess around. They jump right in, using logic, reason, the heavy artillery of argumentation to present a case for Christianity.
And the thing is, it's not just for people who already believe. They're inviting everyone to the table, especially skeptics, to look at the evidence with fresh eye.
That evidence. It's seriously mind-blowing. We're talking origins of the universe, the fine-tuning of, well, everything, even how life itself began. This book digs deep, but in a way that anyone can grasp.
One of the coolest things they point out is that we all have a worldview, like a lens we see the world through. They break it down into three main ones: theism, pantheism, and atheism. And guess what? Each one leads to totally different conclusions about, well, everything.
It's like we're all wearing different glasses, and those glasses, they color how we see the world, right?
Yeah.
And this book, it doesn't shy away from a good debate. It throws down the gauntlet, saying it actually takes more faith to be an atheist than a Christian.
Now, that's a bold statement, and that idea, it's the engine driving this whole book. Geisler and Turek, they set out to prove that believing in God, specifically the God of the Bible, isn't some blind leap. It's a reasonable conclusion based on, you guessed it, evidence.
And they don't just hit you with a bunch of stuffy philosophy, no way. They use real-life stories, scientific discoveries, even personal experiences to drive their points home.
There's this one story I love about a professor, a real skeptic, who gets challenged by a student about God. The student asks, have you, actually investigated every single argument and piece of evidence for God? And the professor, well, he had to admit he hadn't.
Which just goes to show even saying, I don't know, takes a certain kind of faith.
Exactly. We all put our faith in something, whether it's our senses, logic, or the idea that there's a natural explanation for everything. And that leads us to another huge idea the book tackles: truth. In a world where everyone's got their own version, they argue for absolute truth, something beyond just our opinions.
Right, because if everything's relative, then saying there is no absolute truth, well, that becomes a contradiction in itself.
Exactly. The book calls this the roadrunner tactic. The belief, collapses under its own weight. And this whole truth thing, it matters, especially with morality. If there's no real right and wrong, then things like justice, fairness, human rights, they lose all meaning.
Whoa. Makes you think, right? And that's where the book really gets going, diving into the evidence for God. And trust me, things are about to get really interesting. So we're jumping into the deep end with the evidence for God's existence. Where do Geisler and Turek even start with such a huge question?
Well, they've got this clever little system, an acronym that's actually kind of brilliant: SURGE. Each letter, it stands for a piece of scientific evidence pointing to, get this, a beginning for the universe and, maybe a creator behind it all.
Okay, I'm all about a good acronym. Hit me with it. What's S?
S is for the second law of thermodynamics, which basically says the universe is like running out of steam. Usable energy, that is. Imagine a wind-up toy, right? Eventually it's going to stop.
So the universe is one giant wind-up toy, slowly winding down. That's kind of a bleak picture, isn't it?
Well, think about it this way. If it's winding down, it had to be wound up at some point. Had to have a beginning, which throws a wrench in the whole eternal universe idea that was popular for a while.
Yeah, makes sense. If it was always here, wouldn't it be out of juice by now?
Exactly. This second law points to a finite universe, one with a beginning. And that lines up with the creator, wouldn't you say?
Intriguing. Okay, so we've got the universe running out of gas, suggesting a start date. What's next in our Surgigi journey?
U for universe's beginning.
Yeah.
And that brings us to, drumroll please, the Big Bang. And not just as some idea, but something backed by a ton of scientific proof.
Didn't the book tell a crazy story about discovering cosmic background radiation? That seemed like a big deal.
Oh, absolutely. Talk about a happy accident for science. These two scientists, Penzias and Wilson, they're working on a satellite antenna, and this annoying noise just won't go away. They tried everything, even cleaning out, get this, pigeon droppings, thinking that was messing with the signal.
Wait, pigeon poop causing cosmic background radiation? Seriously?
I know, right? Funny in hindsight, but it shows how stumped they were. Turned out they'd stumbled on the afterglow of the Big Bang itself. This radiation, it's everywhere, like a whisper from the very beginning of everything.
So they accidentally took a baby picture of the universe.
Basically. Huge discovery, right? Totally supported the Big Bang, a universe with a beginning. But wait, there's more.
There's always more. Okay, so far it's S for second law, U for universe's beginning, and the Big Bang. What's R stand for?
R is for the radiation from the Big Bang, but it's not just that it exists, it's how it exists. See, this radiation isn't perfectly smooth. It's got these tiny variations, kind of like ripples on a pond.
Ripples in like the fabric of space-time. That's wild. What do those ripples tell us?
Those ripples, those are why we have galaxies. They were teeny tiny differences in density way back when, and over, billions of years, they became the huge structures we see in space.
So if those ripples were even slightly off, no galaxies, no stars, no us.
Bingo. And that, my friend, is fine-tuning. Those ripples, those variations, they had to be just right for anything to exist. The odds of that happening randomly, let's just say you wouldn't want to bet on it.
Mind officially blown. We're talking about the universe being balanced on a knife's edge from the very start. But hold on, didn't Einstein have issues with the Big Bang at first?
Ah, you're thinking of E, Einstein's fudge factor. You see, he was so stuck on the universe being eternal that he fudged his own equations, adding something called the cosmological constant. Tried to make the universe static and unchanging.
So even Einstein, the genius himself, struggled with this idea.
It shows how ingrained that eternal universe idea was. But, to his credit, when faced with the evidence for the Big Bang, Einstein admitted his blunder. He came around to the universe having a beginning.
If Einstein changed his mind, that's got to mean something, right? Okay, so we've got S, U, R, E. What's G stand for? Don't leave me hanging.
G is for galaxy seeds, which is just a cool way to say those all-important variations in the radiation we talked about, the ones that made galaxies possible.
Right, tiny imperfections that were actually crucial for, well, everything.
Exactly. Those galaxy seeds discovered by the Kobe satellite, that was huge. It further backed up the Big Bang and just how ridiculously fine-tuned our universe had to be for us to even be here.
Okay, so we've got this rundown. The universe is winding down, had a beginning, is crazy fine-tuned from the get-go, and even Einstein eventually came around to the idea of a starting point. That's a lot pointing toward a creator. But I'm guessing not everyone's on board with this whole creator idea. What do atheists say to all this?
Oh, they've got their arguments, for sure, and the book dives into those too. Some bring up quantum physics, the uncertainty principle, saying we can't know everything perfectly at the subatomic level.
So, because there's uncertainty with tiny particles, that means the whole universe could just pop into being from nothing.
That's one way they try to explain it, but the book argues, hold on, the uncertainty principle applies to the small stuff, not the universe as a whole. It doesn't get rid of the need for a cause, a beginning.
Makes sense. What about the idea of an eternal universe, though? Haven't some physicists proposed models where the universe expands and contracts so it never really begins?
They have, and those models are interesting, but they still face some hurdles. That second law of thermodynamics, the radiation evidence, the fact that the universe is still expanding, it all points to a beginning. An eternal universe, sure, it's possible on paper, but the current evidence doesn't really support it.
So the book argues something outside the universe, something eternal and incredibly powerful, must have caused it all. Sounds a lot like a creator, but where does life itself come in? How do they tackle that? Now that seems even more mysterious. Okay, so we've covered the universe, the Big Bang, this incredible fine-tuning, but now we're at the big one. How did life itself get here? That seems even more impossible than the universe popping into existence.
Right, it's the ultimate question. And the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, jumps right in, first by tackling this idea that life just kind of spontaneously appeared from non-living stuff.
Yeah, because we're not talking about a couple of molecules bumping into each other, right?
Yeah.
We're talking DNA, proteins, the whole shebang inside a living cell. That's crazy complex.
Exactly. They use this analogy of finding a note on your kitchen counter that says, take out the trash. You wouldn't think, oh, the wind must have blown some ink around and randomly wrote that, right?
Not unless it was a really windy day. I'd assume someone wrote it, obviously. We just get that information like a message. Needs an intelligent source.
Exactly. And that's the heart of their argument against spontaneous generation. It goes against this thing called the principle of uniformity, which basically says the way things happen now is how they happened in the past. And what do we know? Intelligence is the only thing that creates information, especially complex stuff like what's in DNA.
So to believe life came from non-life, you'd have to ignore what we see every single day.
Pretty much. The book says believing in spontaneous generation is like believing that if you tossed Scrabble tiles in the air, they'd land as a Shakespearean sonnet. The odds are, well, not in favor, let's put it that way.
Yeah. I'm not holding my breath for that to happen. But what about the argument that given enough time, anything's possible? Don't evolutionists say, hey, billions of years? That's plenty of time for life to emerge.
Right, the time and chance argument. And the book doesn't shy away from it. Geisler and Turek, they say time by itself doesn't cut it. Imagine a monkey with a typewriter. Give it infinite time, could it write Shakespeare?
I guess in theory, but come on, what are the chances? Basically zero.
Exactly. Same goes for life. Even with billions of years, random chance and chemicals reacting, that doesn't explain the crazy complexity of even the simplest cell. The book compares it to a teaspoon and a kettle. They might look similar and have developed over time, but that doesn't mean one came from the other. More likely, they had a common designer who improved their designs over time.
Okay, so they pretty much ruled out life just appearing out of thin air. So what's their explanation? How did life get here?
Well, since they've established the need for some kind of intelligence behind it all, they start looking at the evidence for design, both in the universe and in us. They argue that the complexity of life, from tiny cells to entire ecosystems, points towards a creator.
So they're saying the universe doesn't look like some random accident, but more like it was planned out.
Exactly. Like Mount Rushmore, nobody thinks wind and rain carved those faces, right? That screams intelligent design, someone with a plan and the skill to pull it off.
And they see that same kind of design in, well, us.
Exactly. They talk about DNA, how it's like a language, a code with all the instructions for building and running a living being. The amount of information packed into DNA, it's mind-blowing. Hard to imagine that just appearing randomly.
Like comparing a paint splatter to the Mona Lisa.
Yeah.
One's an accident, the other's a masterpiece.
Yeah.
You can tell there was a mind behind it.
Right. And the authors, they argue that this design, it points to a designer far smarter and more powerful than anything we can imagine. But they don't stop there.
There's more. Okay, I'm hooked. So they've made a case for a creator, but how do they get from there to the God of Christianity specifically? Why not just some general creative force?
That's where they really dive into who this creator might be. They don't just stop at saying something caused it all. They look at the universe, life, even our sense of right and wrong, and they say the best explanation is the God revealed in the Bible.
Okay, so now we're going beyond science and getting into, like, theology, history. That's a whole other level.
Definitely. And they're upfront about it. They acknowledge that faith has parts that you can't just prove scientifically, but they don't think that makes it irrational. They say faith is built on a foundation of reason and evidence, too.
So you're not checking your brain at the door, but using it to assess the claims of Christianity. I like that.
Exactly. And one of the big things they encourage readers to do is look into the historical evidence about Jesus.
Right, because if Jesus was just some guy, then Christianity doesn't have much weight to it. But if he really was who he said he was, the Son of God, well, that's a game changer.
Absolutely. So the book digs into the historical evidence for Jesus. They look at the New Testament documents, how reliable they are, the eyewitness accounts of his life, death, and resurrection, and the impact he had on history, which, let's be honest, is undeniable.
So they're treating the New Testament like a historical document, like they would any ancient text, looking for evidence and stuff.
Exactly. And they make a case that the New Testament holds up incredibly well under scrutiny.
So how do they do that? What kind of evidence are we talking about?
Yeah.
What makes these documents more than just stories or myths? I'm ready to dive into that. This is where it gets really interesting.
Me too. This is where the rubber meets the road in a lot of ways, and the evidence for the New Testament is more compelling than many people realize. But we'll save those details for our next deep dive. Stay tuned.
Ugh, the suspense. Okay, everyone listening, you heard it here first. We're just getting started. Make sure you join us next time as we go even deeper into I don't have enough faith to be an atheist and explore the evidence that just might change the way you see the world. Until then, keep those brains engaged and those questions coming.